Welcome to Hidden Ties, where every story hides a deeper truth. It started with Jessica throwing my coffee in my face. "Fetch me another one, intern," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. The whole meeting room erupted in laughter. Then the CFO walked in with the shareholder list. I saw their faces change. "That's impossible," Jessica whispered. "Actually, Jessica, about your contract." Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I've been working at Hickman Industries for 7 years now. I'm not a big shot, not a VP or anything like that. But I'm not the intern they treat me as either. My name's Rachel, and I'm 49 years old. Most of the people at the company don't really notice me. I sit in the back, quietly making sure things get done without causing a stir. Until recently, I was content with being the reliable one, the one who always had a hand ready when something needed fixing. But it all changed one Tuesday morning in the middle of a meeting. I was there, as usual, sitting in the corner, scribbling down notes, when Jessica, the senior marketing director, made an offhand comment that rattled me. It was subtle, but enough to make me twitch. She leaned over to one of the other directors and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "I don't know why they still keep Rachel around. She's more trouble than she's worth." Jessica always had that smug way about her, like she was above everyone else. She never saw me as more than someone to order around, and if she could get away with it, she'd treat me like dirt. That day, I had been sent to get coffee for everyone in the meeting. Simple task. Yet, when I returned with everyone's cups, Jessica, sitting at the head of the table, sneered at the steaming mug I handed her. "This isn't what I ordered," she said, pushing it aside as if it was poison. "Get me another one, intern." My hands froze. I had already taken so much from her over the years, but something in that moment snapped. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The whole room went dead silent. They knew what was coming. It wasn't my first time being belittled, but this was the first time I felt like I couldn't just let it slide. "Fetch me another one, intern," Jessica repeated, louder this time. Her tone was sharp, condescending, like I wasn't even a person. It wasn't the coffee, it was the way she said it. And when the others in the room, people who should have known better, laughed along with her, something inside me just broke. "Sure," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of heat I felt in my cheeks. "I'll go get your coffee." But I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting for the moment to pass. It didn't. In a move I would regret later, but would feel justified in, I grabbed the cup she'd pushed away, stood up, and, before anyone could stop me, flung the hot liquid straight at her. The room went dead quiet. Jessica's face turned bright red. Her hands shot up in shock, but it was too late. Her blouse, the one she had spent the morning fawning over in the mirror, was stained beyond repair. The silence lasted a moment too long before it was broken by the unmistakable sound of laughter. The others, the ones who had always played along with Jessica's power games, laughed. Some in disbelief, others in glee. But then, just as quickly, the door opened with a sudden swing. The CFO, Greg Halliday, walked in, flipping through a set of papers in his hand. His sharp gaze flicked over the room, settling on Jessica. "Is there something funny going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp, too sharp for the atmosphere in the room. Jessica was frozen, her face still covered in coffee. She couldn't speak. "Well, whatever it is, I've got something for everyone here. You might want to sit down for this." Greg's voice cut through the room like a knife, and for the first time, I saw fear in Jessica's eyes. Greg placed the shareholder list on the table with a heavy thud. He flipped it open and began reading off the names. I could see Jessica's posture stiffen, her fingers curling into fists. "That's impossible," she whispered, staring at the list. But I had already caught the look on her face, something I never thought I'd see in Jessica. Fear. And in that moment, everything shifted. The story of my humiliating coffee toss wasn't over. "Actually, Jessica," Greg said, his eyes locked on her with the kind of quiet intensity that only the CFO could wield. "About your contract." Greg didn't even give Jessica a chance to respond. He just let the silence settle over the room like a storm cloud, heavy and thick. The other directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their laughter dying in their throats. I could practically hear the gears turning in Jessica's head, but no words came out. "Jessica," Greg continued, his tone never changing, "I've been reviewing the shareholder list, and it seems we need to have a chat about your position." Her face went pale. It wasn't like the Jessica I knew, the Jessica who could have cut someone down with a single look, the Jessica who always walked into a room like she owned it, no matter who was in her way. "Greg, she started, her voice tight, but he raised a hand to stop her. "No need to explain right now," he said, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "You'll get the details soon enough." I couldn't help myself. I leaned forward, a small sense of satisfaction curling in my chest. For the first time, Jessica wasn't the one calling the shots. She wasn't the one making everyone feel small. No, now it was her turn to shrink in front of us all. She looked almost like a child caught in a lie, caught in something much bigger than she could handle. The room was still, every single person glued to the exchange happening before us. And, in that instant, I realized something. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee anymore. This was something deeper, something much larger than that. This was about power. Greg turned his attention to me then, his gaze cutting through the tension like a hot knife. "And as for you, Rachel," he began, and my stomach lurched. My heart skipped a beat. "We'll be discussing your role as well." I froze. Had he noticed me all these years? Was this it? My moment to be seen? Jessica shot me a glare that could have killed me on the spot. I could practically hear her seething, but I wasn't afraid. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was in play now. Greg didn't say another word before turning and walking out of the room, leaving the lingering air heavy with questions. "Rachel!" Jessica hissed, her voice low and venomous as the door clicked shut behind Greg. "You think you've won? You're nothing. A joke. I'll make sure you regret this. You can't just do this to me and expect there won't be consequences." But I wasn't listening anymore. I wasn't that frightened intern who had always been afraid of her words. No, something had shifted. I was done with being ignored. I was done being everyone's scapegoat. Done with the little digs, the little humiliations. Today, I wasn't backing down. "Regret it?" I finally managed, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Jessica, I've been regretting your treatment for years. Today's just the beginning." Her jaw tightened. For a moment I thought she might lunge at me, but she just turned, her back rigid with barely contained fury. "I'll make sure you're out of here," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I wasn't worried. I wasn't scared of her anymore. The days after the meeting were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Jessica tried to play it off like nothing had happened, like she still had control over everything and everyone. But I could feel it. The walls were closing in on her. It wasn't just the coffee incident anymore. It was something else. Something deeper. And it wasn't just Greg who was involved anymore. The whole company seemed to be watching closely, waiting for the next move. Word had gotten around. The whispers in the hallways. People had noticed. People knew I wasn't the same. And so, in the weeks that followed, things began to change for me too. I found myself in Greg's office more often than I ever expected. It wasn't what I thought it would be. I thought I would be reprimanded, questioned about my actions, made to feel small again. But no, he didn't ask about the coffee incident. He didn't ask about Jessica. Instead, he kept pulling out files, talking about acquisitions, budgets, forecasts. He was giving me more responsibility than I had ever dreamed of. It was like I had become invisible to the company all these years, and now that I had gotten their attention, they couldn't stop looking. It was odd, in a way. I was used to being ignored, used to being the one who was never asked for an opinion. But now, things were different. People started turning to me for answers. They were coming to me for advice, for direction. My suggestions weren't being laughed off, they were being taken seriously. But as the weeks went on, the pressure mounted. Jessica wasn't letting go of the humiliation. Her cold eyes followed me every time we crossed paths, and I could feel the weight of her resentment. And, for the first time, I saw it. The cracks in her carefully constructed image. Jessica wasn't the strong, untouchable woman she pretended to be. No, now she was crumbling from within. Her carefully manicured exterior was slipping away. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about watching her lose everything she thought she had, watching her finally realize that she was no longer in control. A month passed, and things started to shift in the office. I wasn't the intern anymore. I wasn't the help who made mistakes and was shoved into corners. I had something real now, something I had never been offered before: influence. But it wasn't easy. I had to keep my head down, my interactions carefully measured. I didn't trust Jessica's silent, steely gaze on me from across the room. Every time we passed each other in the hall, I could feel the tension crackling. She wasn't done with me. I wasn't naive enough to believe she would let me walk away unscathed. But it wasn't just Jessica I had to be careful of. It was everyone. In the past few weeks, Greg had pulled me into more and more meetings, even had me sitting in on discussions about company strategy, things I never imagined I'd be involved in. The more he included me, the more the others started to look at me differently. At first, I was unsure of what exactly he wanted from me. Then, during a late afternoon meeting with the board, everything clicked. I was sitting near the back, as usual, taking notes. Greg was sitting at the head of the table, talking through the new quarter's numbers. Everyone was glued to the screen. Then, without warning, Greg slid a folder across the table toward me. It was thick, brimming with proposals and potential partnerships. "Rachel," he said, his voice suddenly cutting through the hum of conversation, "why don't you walk us through these?" All eyes turned to me. Every single one. The weight of their stares felt like it could crush me, but I didn't flinch. I took the folder in my hands, my fingers moving to open it. But before I could speak, Jessica's voice sliced through the moment like a sharp knife. "Rachel's going to handle this?" Her tone was dripping with condescension, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't something she should be involved with. She's not experienced enough." I let out a slow breath, trying to ignore the prickle of annoyance creeping up my spine. I could feel the room's discomfort as her challenge hung in the air. Greg didn't flinch. He just gave her a tight, almost unreadable smile. "Actually, Jessica," he said, his voice even but firm, "I'm going to let Rachel handle it. She's been doing excellent work, and frankly, it's time we gave her a chance to step up." The shock on Jessica's face was immediate, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite form the words. The room went silent. I had expected a fight, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. I hadn't thought Greg would put Jessica on the defensive, not in front of everyone. But there it was. The tension between them, between Jessica and me, was real and undeniable. I wasn't sure whether Greg was testing me or simply trying to make a statement, but I seized the moment. I opened the folder, began discussing the proposals, project timelines, financial projections, potential investors, and in the process, I saw the change in the room. At first, there were whispers, raised eyebrows, but by the time I finished presenting, there was nothing but silence. A good silence, the kind that came with realization. I could see their eyes on me, those same people who used to laugh when Jessica humiliated me, now watching with a new respect. The meeting wrapped up soon after. I could hear the low murmur of conversation as people trickled out of the room, but Jessica stayed behind. I could feel her presence like a shadow looming just behind me. "Well," she said, her voice cold, "you've really made your mark, haven't you? A little intern who thinks she's got what it takes." I didn't turn to face her. I kept my eyes on the stack of papers in front of me, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "I don't think I have to prove anything to you anymore, Jessica," I said, my voice calm. And as for the intern label, well, I think we both know I'm past that. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then I heard her shift, the sound of her footsteps moving away from me. "Just wait," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You'll see. It's all going to come crashing down. You'll be nothing without me." But I wasn't worried anymore. The tables had turned. Jessica wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. The next few days were a blur of meetings, emails, and briefings. It was like I had stepped into a new role, one I hadn't realized I could play. I was no longer just a cog in the machine. I was starting to influence decisions. I was shaping the future of the company. And every time I saw Jessica, that little flicker of dread in her eyes was becoming more and more visible. But despite all of this, I knew I wasn't finished. No, I wasn't going to just sit back and watch her squirm. She was still dangerous, still the one who had made my life miserable for so long. And I knew there was something coming, something that would change everything for both of us. It wasn't just the coffee incident. No, this was bigger than that. I began to gather information, quietly, subtly. I spoke to people who had worked with Jessica in the past. I paid attention to the details, the conversations she thought no one was hearing. And slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. The truth about Jessica wasn't what anyone thought it was. It was time for me to expose her. It was time for her to face the consequences of everything she had done to me, and to everyone else who had suffered under her reign. And when it happened, when I made my move, it would be nothing like the coffee incident. This time, Jessica would know exactly who she was up against. The day it all fell into place wasn't a dramatic one. In fact, it started off like any other. A quiet morning at the office, people scurrying to their desks, coffee cups in hand, exchanging pleasantries, pretending the tension wasn't building. But it was. I could feel it in the air. It was there in the way people glanced at me. People who once barely acknowledged my existence, now regarding me with cautious curiosity. Greg had made his mark, but it was clear that the others were still watching, still unsure. Jessica was becoming a shadow. She tried to carry on like nothing had happened, but I could see the cracks widening every day. She no longer dominated the room with her brash confidence. Now she was just trying too hard. I'd kept digging, kept my eyes open, my ears sharp, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the pieces had come together. Jessica had been making deals under the table, shady partnerships with rival companies, using her position to line her pockets with bribes. She wasn't the picture of strength I'd once envied. She was a fraud, a manipulative, power-hungry fraud. And now I had the evidence. I walked into the office that morning with a single goal: to make sure that when Jessica went down, she would go down hard. Greg had pulled me aside earlier in the week, telling me that he wanted my thoughts on a new partnership proposal. That was when I made my move. I pretended to work through the documents with him, all the while keeping an eye on the CEO's calendar, on the schedule for the upcoming meeting. It wasn't long before I knew the exact moment to strike. I slipped out of Greg's office and headed toward Jessica's. She had already been acting weird, dodging eye contact, never staying in one place for too long. It was almost like she knew something was coming, but she wasn't sure what. I could see it in the tight set of her jaw, the way she clenched her fists when no one was looking. Her door was cracked open. She didn't hear me approach, so I took a moment to gather myself. I needed to be calm, collected. I needed to make this look like the smallest crack, something she could never have anticipated. I knocked once before entering. "Rachel," she said, her voice sharp, almost like she was expecting me. "What is it?" I could smell her anxiety, the way she tried to mask it behind that cool exterior. She was already on edge. "Just wanted to talk," I said, keeping my tone light, like we were still on the same level, still working on the same team. "About the proposals for the new quarter." She didn't look at me immediately. Instead, she fiddled with a stack of papers on her desk, rearranging them in a way that suggested she was stalling. "What about them?" she asked, her voice tight. I moved closer, standing beside her desk. I didn't want her to feel cornered, yet. but I needed her to know that I wasn't the same person I had been. Not anymore. "I've been looking into the deals you've been making," I said quietly, my words slow and deliberate. She froze. Her fingers hovered over the papers for a moment before slowly lowering to the desk. "What are you talking about?" she said, but her voice didn't sound as confident as it had before. It was shaky. I knew I had her. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, stepping a little closer. "The off-the-books deals, the side contracts. You've been pocketing money from rival companies. I've got everything. Emails, documents, statements, proof." Her face went pale. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. But there was no way out now. "I don't know what you're talking about," she hissed, but the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. I placed the folder I had been carrying onto her desk, watching her face closely as I slid it toward her. It wasn't a big folder, but the weight of it seemed to crush the air between us. "Why don't you take a look, Jessica? The board's going to love this, especially Greg." She stared at the folder as if it were some kind of venomous snake, but after a long, torturous silence, she slowly reached for it. Her hand trembled as she opened it. I watched her face as she scanned the papers, the color draining from her face with every page she turned. She started, but her words caught in her throat. I could feel the power shift again, but this time it wasn't in her favor. The room, once filled with her dominance, was now empty of the control she'd held. The tables had turned. "You've been lying to everyone," I said softly. "To Greg, to the board, to all of us." Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know what you're doing. You have no idea what's at stake here." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think I do." Her hands were trembling now, her eyes frantic. "Please, Rachel, don't do this. I can make this go away. We can work something out. I cut her off. "No, no more working something out. No more bending to your will. This ends now." The reality of what she had done, the sheer magnitude of her manipulation, was dawning on her. For once, she was powerless. "Don't worry," I said, turning to leave. "This will be handled. It's too late for anything else." And with that, I walked out of her office, leaving her standing there, her world beginning to crumble. By the time I made it back to my desk, my heart was racing. It wasn't relief I felt. It was something else, something satisfying. I had finally done what I needed to do, what I had been planning for all these years. I wasn't going to be silenced anymore, but there was still one more thing to do. I shot Greg a quick message, asking him to meet with me in his office as soon as possible. I had all the proof I needed now, but it wasn't enough to just take Jessica down. I needed to see it through. I needed Greg to know exactly what was happening. He responded almost immediately, and within an hour I was sitting across from him, papers spread out before us, ready to expose everything. Greg's office was the kind of place that felt like it had been built for decisions. Leather chairs, dark wood paneling, a conference table large enough to hold an army of people, but right now it was just the two of us. He wasn't there yet. I was sitting at his desk, fiddling with the edge of the papers I had laid out. My hands were steady now, but my mind raced, replaying every moment. How had I gotten here? How had Jessica's empire, her carefully crafted world of manipulation and power, slipped from her grasp so quickly? I remembered the coffee incident, the moment everything had shifted. That was when I'd started seeing the cracks, when I first started plotting. But today was different. Today, it was time to finish what I'd started. Greg walked in, his usual calm demeanor setting the tone as he moved around the desk, giving me a questioning glance before taking his seat across from me. "You wanted to talk about something?" he asked, folding his arms, looking me over. There was curiosity in his eyes, but not the type that would suggest suspicion. He still believed in me, trusted me. "I have something for you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling inside. "Something about Jessica." He leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "What about Jessica?" he asked, his tone neutral, like he was bracing for a minor issue to be revealed. I slid the folder across the desk to him, the same folder that had just moments ago turned Jessica's world upside down. Greg opened it without hesitation, flipping through the pages quickly, his eyes scanning the documents, the emails, the contracts. I didn't speak. I just watched his face, looking for any sign of what he was thinking. It didn't take long. His eyes narrowed as he went through the last of the documents, the last of the undeniable evidence. Is this? He trailed off, staring at me, his voice more serious than I'd ever heard it. It's all there, I said. Everything you need. Jessica's been running this company into the ground with her personal deals, using her position to profit off rival companies, bribing others, keeping it all hidden behind closed doors. Greg didn't speak right away. He just set the folder down slowly, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something to throw me off, to make me feel like I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But no. His eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something. Not anger, not betrayal. Just realization. I didn't want to believe it, he said quietly, almost as though he were speaking to himself. But this is too much. This is everything. I couldn't help the small rush of triumph that bubbled up inside me. I had done it. I had taken Jessica down. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Greg's gaze shifted from the papers to me. You did the right thing, Rachel. I won't let her get away with this. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, a note of something darker. This wasn't about business anymore. This was personal. This was revenge. You'll need to inform the board, I said, keeping my voice cool, and make sure Jessica doesn't have a chance to run. She's already trying to cover her tracks. He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. I'll take care of it. She won't get away. He stood up, gathering the papers into a neat stack. But before he left the room, he paused and looked back at me. You've done more than just bring the truth to light. You've shown me what you're really capable of. I'm impressed, Rachel. I gave him a small nod. I wasn't there for praise. I wasn't there for anything but the end of this chapter. I'll handle the rest, he said, and then just as quietly, he left the room. I sat there for a while, letting the weight of it all settle in. The room felt different now, less oppressive, less like a cage I had been stuck in, and more like a place where I could breathe. It had taken everything to get here, my patience, my strategy, the careful weaving of every interaction. But in the end, it had been worth it. Jessica had underestimated me. She had thought I was just some intern who didn't belong, someone she could humiliate, someone she could push around. But that wasn't who I was, not anymore. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and, finally, the fallout. Greg had called the board into an emergency session, and by the end of the day, Jessica's position was gone. The company was in chaos. People who had been loyal to her were scrambling to find new footing, and the air was thick with gossip. I stayed in the background watching it all unfold. I wasn't going to gloat. I wasn't going to throw it in their faces. This wasn't about winning the small battles. This was about the bigger picture, the one where I finally got my chance to be who I knew I could be. Greg offered me a promotion, something official. He told me that he had been watching my progress for a while, and now he had full faith in my ability to lead. But I didn't want that right away. Not yet. I wasn't ready to sit at the top of the pyramid just yet. There was something still nagging at me, something about Jessica. I had seen how she crumbled when she realized she'd lost everything, but it was still too easy. She wasn't the one I was worried about anymore. It was the others, the ones who had watched her climb and watched me fall. But I wasn't done. I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Days later, I received an invitation from Jessica. I didn't expect it, but then again, I should have. She wanted to meet. I was reluctant, but something inside me said I needed to see this through. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe. She was dressed in a coat too expensive for the occasion, her face pale and drawn. When she saw me, her expression flickered for just a second, something like fear, maybe regret, but it was gone quickly. She tried to hide it, but I saw it. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was just a woman who had been exposed. "You did this," she said, her voice low, her fingers trembling around her coffee cup. I didn't respond right away. I just let her speak. "You took everything from me." She sounded broken now, the hard exterior gone. "You humiliated me." I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her, not after everything she had done. "No, Jessica," I said softly. "You did that to yourself. I just made sure people saw it." She stared at me for a long moment, and for the first time I saw the full weight of what she had lost. "Greg has made his choice," she said finally, her voice cracking. "And you've won. But don't think for a second that I'll let you get away with this. You haven't seen the last of me." I stood up, smoothing my coat. "You should have thought about that before you tried to destroy me." And with that, I walked away. The finality of it hit me later, after the dust had settled. Jessica had been powerful once, but in the end, it was me who had risen from the ashes. Everything had changed, and I knew the world was mine for the taking.